Good morning, everyone. It's been a while. It's been 2.5 years. I was pretty sure it had been 1.5 years. It was 2.5 years. So it's been a while. It's so good to be back. Happy Independence Day to you. This is a different morning than is typical, and since it's a special day, I guess we're having a special time together. And this morning is not going to be a lesson proper, but yes, an encouragement to you, much like Paul and Barnabas coming back and reporting all the good things God had been doing. I want to do that this morning, telling you about the work at the Ukrainian Bible Institute. I also want to thank the artists who painted our portraits in the foyer. I'm not sure that's ever happened to me before, but that was pretty cool, walking in to see our family up there on the wall in the museum of this building. We are Brandon, Katie, and Justice Price. Justice is 4.5 years old, and he is awesome, and we love him very much. His Russian is fantastic. He's declared a couple times that he speaks it better than me, and which I have explained not yet, but it's coming very soon. We have been in Ukraine for a while, around 13 years total, and Linder Road began partnering with us right before we moved to the city of Kharkiv, Ukraine, on the eastern border to begin a church plant there. And that was way back in 2010 when we began our relationship with this congregation. We were there for 8 years and then received the invitation to join the work at the Ukrainian Bible Institute. I still introduce myself as a missionary in Ukraine. I just see it now as a different kind of mission work, for sure. And so 2 years ago, actually today, I just realized sitting over there, we arrived on Independence Day there. 2 years ago, I began my year of shadowing the director, and then a year ago, I took over the role as director of the Bible Institute. It's still standing. Only been a year, but it is still standing, and for that I am proud. This piece of paper here. So this is our family when we take family portraits. This is our family before we rob banks, which we've been doing a lot of lately, a lot of bank robbing. We are so glad to be here, and this morning what I want to do is, I know a lot of you don't even know much about the Ukrainian Bible Institute, so I want to give you a little background to what the school is, how the school is doing now, and where we're hoping to go in the future. And so for those that aren't as familiar, the Ukrainian Bible Institute began 25 years ago this fall. It's been 25 years we're celebrating, and it began in the city of Donetsk, which is in the southeast of Ukraine. At that time in Ukraine, the country was full of, well, it's not full of, there were a lot of new Christians, a lot of new churches being planted, a lot of new preachers, new Christians that were standing up saying, we want to be a preacher at our congregation, but they didn't know much. And so the Ukrainian Bible Institute began to fill that gap of taking these eager preachers and teaching them God's Word. So they would come to Donetsk to study for 2 full years, full time, receiving their stipend from people in the States, or maybe their particular sponsoring churches in the States. And so that began, and as time went on, UBI kind of became a conduit for benevolent work from the States, and humanitarian aid would happen. The school partnered with orphanages, with hospitals, and it really became a cornerstone of the work of the churches of Christ in Ukraine, especially the southeast of Ukraine. So the school grew, the work grew. Eventually, they were able to acquire their own building with classrooms and offices and dorms on the second floor, and that took years to finalize. And then 2014 happened, and everything was turned upside down. Russian aggression turned the Donetsk and Lugansk regions into their own separate republics. So here's a map here Donetsk and Lugansk, those are the two provinces on the east. Those are now the declared independent republics of Donetsk and Lugansk. Crimea here at the bottom was lopped off and is now a part of Russia. And so it was a crazy time. A lot of people lost their homes. A lot of people lost their lives. UBI was forced to close temporarily to figure out what is going to happen with this school, with this building, with this city. Not sure what was going to happen to Donetsk itself. But unfortunately, things did not go back to normal. And the Bible Belt of Ukraine, essentially, faced its own Acts 8 movement. And so, like a devastating forest fire, there was some unexpected new growth as Christians spread across and started to stay where they landed. Graduates of the Ukrainian Bible Institute starting new churches and helping with all of the humanitarian aid work. And so after looking at several options, the Ukrainian Bible Institute, and having closed for a whole semester, they chose to settle in the capital city of Ukraine. There's the front of our building. Some of you have already seen that in the video. And let me mention this now in case I accidentally miss it later. The Heat for the Holidays was such an encouraging fundraiser. The money that was collected was above and beyond what we expected it to bring. It was an encouragement to our students. It's been an encouragement to other school sponsors as we've shared that story with them. And getting your feedback from the video and seeing the students in the apartment was just very special. So thank you very much personally and on behalf of the school. Thank you for that. So Kyiv was a good choice, but it's also the most expensive choice. Out of all the cities, it felt like the right one, but because the school now lost its building that it owned, its dorms that it owned, and because Kyiv is a more expensive city, expenses went up over 3 times and still are that bad because we're renting and because the city's more expensive, and after this last year, prices have gone up as well. So that's the biggest challenge, but we are very glad that we're there. It really is a central location for everyone in the country, and there are 6 churches of Christ in the city, which the school gets to work with in different ways. So UBI has been in Kyiv for 5 or 6 years now. I can't do math. So that's just a brief look at where UBI has come from. I did mention that UBI began as a work of the Sunset International Bible Institute, a branch school initially. Now it's just affiliated. But here's where we've been up to lately. This is our student body as of February, before our graduation that we just had. Good group of students who have done some pretty amazing things already and who are doing or getting ready to do some amazing things. This last year, though, was a weird year for us. For those of you who have not brushed up on your Russian since high school, let me read this to you with my best American accent. Coronavirus is what that says. Coronavirus. It's kind of a bizarre thing. Let me try to share this with you. In Ukraine, there was this virus. And it turned out to be more serious than we expected. And so they closed the borders down, and then they started closing everything down. I see you're shocked to hear this. It really was bizarre. We had to wear masks everywhere we go. It was politicized. You wouldn't believe how politicized it was. It was terrible. And it really influenced and put a lot of pressure on us as a school and how we reacted to that. I wish I could convey this better, but you'll just have to trust me. So yeah, coronavirus was not fun, still isn't in all those ways. This is what our chapel time looks like every day before classes start. We have a half hour of chapel, of singing, a lesson, and prayer. This is what it looked like before coronavirus. This is what it looked like after the lockdown. Again, I know none of you can relate to this. Not the same at all. Coronavirus has been a challenge for everyone all around the world and every sphere that we have, but especially, as we all know, education. And so that was a challenge for us. How do we rise to the occasion? And it pushed us to grow very quickly technically and to think differently about how we do things and coming to terms with how differently things have to be. We have become pretty proficient in accommodating for distance learning, and the students have gone through periods of having to study from home, but also a big part of UBI is having visiting American teachers come over. They make up a lot of the staff throughout the year. And so all of a sudden, none of them could come, but all of them were willing to keep teaching online. And so that meant we were changing start times depending on the term and which time zone the American teacher was in here. We had teachers teaching from Pacific Standard, waking up at 3:45 in the morning to teach our students in the afternoon in Ukraine. And so even though it was a challenge, it was a blessing because people said, yes, I will keep going. We will do this together. Going? Oops, missed something? Oh, it's good. So we actually spent a lot of the year in the classroom. We had the different, things to follow, regulations to follow, but we did get to spend most of the school year in the classroom. And when it was with our local Ukrainian staff, class was more or less like normal. But when it was online, when it was our American teachers or even other Ukrainian teachers in other cities who weren't able to travel, this is what it looked like. We got a TV for one of the classrooms, and we stuck with the projector for the bigger classroom. So this is Zhenya translating for our teachers teaching over Zoom, and it went well. It was not fun, but it felt good to have been able to rise to the challenge and say, look, we're still doing this. It's still happening. It's still working. This is Sergey. He's kind of our IT guy who is also head of the correspondence distance learning that the schools already had. They watch a video on YouTube, take tests, that kind of thing. And it was January or February or so where he came to me and just said he was really discouraged in his work because it didn't feel like he had a lot to do. He didn't know what his purpose was at school. And then we had the coronavirus, and he became the busiest person on staff. And so if you're going to blame anyone, it's his fault. Within a matter of just a couple days, he and I were online finding all the used cameras, used webcams we could find, getting the students set up in their different, we have 3 student apartments, getting them set up with internet that would not break every 5 seconds and computers that could be online altogether. It was a challenge, but he did great, and very thankful for that. Let's put that aside, though. Let's stop talking about coronavirus. Besides that, we have been making a focus on trying to teach more practical skills at the Ukrainian Bible Institute. Now, there's always been practical skills taught. There's always been the preaching classes and the public speaking classes, and our students have been involved in works with hands-on evangelism and volunteering and stuff. But we've been pushing some more practical things, how to use the information you're gaining. And the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. Not just, oh, that was nice, but we need more of that, the students have been saying. So 2 years ago, or 2 school years ago, a little more than a year ago, we had our first class on youth ministry, theory of youth ministry, how to get a youth ministry started, and pastoral counseling, Christian mentorship, trying to help grow in the faith, other people who are desiring to grow but don't know what their gifts are and things like that, how to teach youth and how that differs from teaching adults, how to teach women's classes. Our ladies are given different experiences in kind of public speaking in front of each other, but haven't been pushed like they have this year to lead a small group kind of Bible study, and that went really well as too. So very excited about that. The last class of this year for our second year students was called Practical Evangelism. It's a 4-day class. We call them these like seminar weeks. And we invited, of those 4 days, 3 of those days were former students, some of our alumni, to come, people that have the gift of evangelism and are passionate about sharing it. We invited them to each have a day and share what they do and their specific ministries and their passions. And this is Two of them, it was their first time to come back to the school and teach, and they were honored and nervous to do that. Here the three of them are. The man on the left, his name is Yuri. He became a Christian years and years ago in a town that didn't have a church, and he said, we need a church. So they started meeting in his home, and that's what he did for years until he had the opportunity to go to UBI and study, and now he's back doing that. He's done a lot of work helping the internally displaced Ukrainians. The man in the middle is Bogdan. He and his wife actually came and transitioned into Kharkov, where we were, as we were transitioning out. He and his wife both, before they were married, spent years in prison, both of them themselves, and have a passion for prison ministry or those who are just down and out in their lives. They're getting ready to start this halfway house rehab center in Kharkov, which we're excited about. And then the man on the right is Victor. He and his wife are graduates from a few years ago, and they've been doing a church plant in eastern Ukraine, and one of their first converts is one of our graduates from this year. So it's really exciting to see how the connections are being made. The students loved the class, and they said, why didn't we do this before? Having people come in and share their practical experiences. We did have graduation this year. We did not have it last year. We had 8 graduates this year. We had 6 finish last year. We invited them to join us for the ceremony this year to give them something special. 4 were able to come, and it was a special day. This was kind of our first larger event since all of this has happened, and it was a blessing for everyone. This is the staff plus our graduates from this year, and I show this because I want to point out this lady right here on the right. Her name is Ludmila, and she's our office manager. She was in one of the first classes of the Ukrainian Bible Institute. But way back then, 25 plus years ago, when she became a Christian, she worked at a bakery, and she was telling everybody about her newfound faith. And that included this woman in the middle named Lena, who was her boss. Her boss at that time had no interest at all in what she was trying to sell. And as the years went on, there was no interest. But Lena had a husband who struggled with alcoholism. And then eventually she struggled with alcoholism and ended up getting very, very sick with a disease. She was in the hospital. They actually had to remove one of her eyes. She's got a very frail body. She's in her early 50s. And as she was in the hospital, she thought, this isn't going so well for me. And she promised to God that she would change her life. And as she got out of the hospital, she returned to the only church she knew about, the only one she had heard about, and started attending the congregation in Donetsk. This is all post-war. This is all post-2014. There's a church still meeting down there. She became part of the church and then was motivated to go and study. And now she's one of our graduates. And she is going to be returning to Donetsk. She lost her home in the war. It was totally destroyed. She's going to be living at the school building. The UBI still owns it. We just can't do anything with it. And so she'll be living there for a time, but she's excited to get working and feels like she needs to go back to her city and be around family and her home church. And so we're excited for her. These are the rest of the graduates from this year. Masha is the daughter of someone who graduated last year. Her mom graduated, and then she graduated this year. Next to her is Oleg. He's someone who became a Christian back in some work in Donetsk, and after the war pushed him to Kyiv, he found himself back in the church and came to the school. This is Yegor. His brother's been to the Ukrainian Bible Institute. His father's been through UBI. And this year he completed, and he's planning on going just to further his education in a normal university. This girl right here is not 11. She kind of looks like it most of the time. She is the convert from the church plant, from one of our other graduates, and she just a couple weeks ago got married to another graduate who's doing a church planting work outside of the capital city, and so now that's where they are. This is Miroslava. She's from Kyiv and came through youth ministry work that was happening. And this is Sveta, someone she grew up in the church more or less in Kyiv since she was, I think, 13. And she was working at a grocery store and had a coworker that would not stop talking about her family and how much she loved her family. And God used that to have her ask herself, if she can talk so freely about how much she loves her family, why can't I say the same thing about Jesus? And so she was motivated to go to the school and to learn. And so she just finished. And then this guy back here, he's our live wire in the class. He was the one where day to day you're like, I don't know that we're doing anything here. But then on graduation day, and he's up there speaking, and you remember who he was the first day he came, and you're like, no, this is good. He's somebody who spent, I think, 14 years in prison himself, and is passionate about prison ministry too. He's engaged to another one of our students, and he hopes to get involved in rehab, reintegration work with prisoners. After graduation, we sat down with most of them and interviewed them about their experience at UBI. I wanted to share that with you this morning. I wanted you to hear their voices and hear their emotion, and so if you could just pretend to understand Russian right now, that would be very helpful. But if not, there are subtitles, so read carefully, because they go by quickly, and this is just a 4.5 minute video. You'll see.
Учеба в ИБИ, невозможно сказать, что не понравилось. Конечно, понравилось.
И преподаватель, и каждый человек хочет о том, чтобы мы чему-то научились, чтобы не просто мы получили какие-то знания, ну и пошли, а для того, чтобы мы эти знания научились применять.
Я стала намного дисциплинированнее, я научилась работать над собой, я научилась говорить правильно о своей вере, я могу донести людям то, во что я верю действительно.
В ИБИ я научилась не то что снисходительно, а скорее всего над собой работать, опускать свою гордость и уметь из-за этого общаться со всеми людьми, которые находятся рядом.
Раньше мне было очень страшно говорить о Христе, потому что мне казалось о том, что сейчас меня что-то спросят, а мне не получится ответить. А сейчас я знаю о том, что что ответить, я знаю, как звучит вообще само Евангелие, и о том, как Евангелие изменяет сердца других людей.
В ИБИ, как моя любимая фраза, я научился учиться.
Самое особенное, что я приобрел в ИБИ, это понимание Слова Божьего. Понимание контекста, понимание исторического фона, понимание тех причин и обстоятельств, которые были тогда, и как их применять сейчас.
Большинство предметов мне понравилось, особенно таких практических, где там душепопечение у нас было, классный предмет с Крисом Джо. Был еще предмет молодежное служение, очень, так сказать, для меня актуальный предмет.
Кроме изучения слова здесь давались и такие предметы, как и общаться с людьми, евангелизация, как детей воспитывать, и уроки как проводить. Были своего рода трудности, но, если честно, если бы мне сказали еще раз отучиться в ИБИ, я бы отучилась бы, мне понравилось.
100% это дало то, что я теперь понимаю, чем я хочу заниматься, и теперь я могу служить в церкви с действительно огромными знаниями.
ИБИ дало мне четкие понятия о том, кто я как христианин, и в будущем я могу спокойно это людям объяснять, говорить о том, кто я, что я делаю, из чего состоит моя жизнь.
Ты духовно так наполняешься, что хочешь потом служить, и дай Бог, я думаю, буду Господа просить, чтобы это не прошло у меня.
Я думаю, что 2 года этих были насыщенными, и они очень пролетели быстро. Не хватало бы 3-го года.
Мои планы на будущее в служении и те истины, те знания, которые я приобрел в ИБИ, я хочу направить в служение реабилитации. И моя мечта – это реабилитационный центр. В общем, я заплакал. Нет.
Теперь смогу не только библейские истины изучать, а еще изучать профессии различные тоже с легкостью, я думаю. Поэтому ИБИ мне дало очень такие хорошие навыки на мое будущее.
Еще в будущем я собираюсь заниматься юридической деятельностью и этим самым помогать церкви, потому что юристов у нас немного.
Я очень рада, что я действительно пробыла это время в изучении. Это сформировало меня как христианку, и я очень благодарна тем, кто действительно помогает, потому что это невероятное благословение.
Я очень рада, что я пошла учиться, и мне это дало, опять же, таки основную крепкую базу, на которой я потом могу дальше строить свою жизнь.
УБИ — это тот трамплин, та дверь, которая ведет в будущее. И реально ясное, четкое будущее. Служить Богу.
Was that encouraging? I was so encouraged by, I wasn't there the day they did it, and so when I watched it, I was just like, yes. And what I love hearing in there is, over here, we don't say this in Ukraine, but over here UBI is often just referred to as, oh, that preacher training school. But it's so much more than a preacher training school. I love how Miroslava said, it's given me a foundation to build the rest of my life on. Absolutely. Yegor, who was a terrible student growing up, was forced to either survive or die at Ukrainian Bible Institute, and he survived. It says, now I have the skills I need to study any profession. And so we've got these students, some want to go into full-time ministry, and some just wanted that foundational experience, the knowledge and the practical skills, and now they're going to move on and participate in this up-and-coming middle class that's happening in Ukraine. And we're going to have people who can support themselves, and it's not all just about full-time ministry, for professional ministry. So it was so encouraging to hear them say that, and I know that you were encouraged by that. And so that was this year at UBI. Before we finish, I would like to just share with you a little bit about where we're dreaming, things we're thinking about, because even though things are going well, we want to be careful not to just do the things we've always done just because we've always done them. Ukraine is not the same country it was 25 years ago. It's completely different. UBI began after the fall of the wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union. People were starving for God's word. There were very few printed resources in the native languages. The internet was not the source of information it would become. So if you wanted to study the Bible and know anything about the Bible, there were few places to get that information. And UBI was one of them. UBI was an oasis in a spiritual desert. But 25 years later, things look very different. Christian churches are not the novelty that they once were. A whole generation and a half of people have grown up with Christian churches on every other street corner. The Bible's not the rare commodity it once was. I know a man who became a Christian, went to UBI, became a minister, and still ministers to this day because he heard there was an American group in town and they had real but Russian Bibles in hand, and he went to see one in person because he'd always heard about it. Beautiful story. Doesn't happen anymore. Every grandma at service pulls out the Bible on her cell phone. It's a different world. There are many Bible study resources available to everyone. Churches, if they weren't already streaming their services before the pandemic, are now. And so this dry desert of biblical information has become this ocean, an ocean of information. And so now I think as UBI looks to the future, UBI needs to stand as a lighthouse and not really think of itself as this oasis, because the information's out there and people are getting tossed around on the waves and confused about what's going on. And UBI needs to stand as a lighthouse to those who are seeking, and not just to those who want to be full-time ministers, a light to the alumni that are working out on the open seas, a light revealing those practical skills and what does all this look like in today's world. And so we're asking questions like, how are our students different today, and what skills do they need today? And we want to be sensitive to what God is calling UBI to be in today's world, just like those who began it then were sensitive to the times as well. So as we're talking, none of this is set for sure, but these are ideas we keep coming back to as we look to the future. One is distance learning. How can we utilize what we've grown so quickly in over this last year? UBI's always had this to a certain extent, but it needs to grow, and people now are expecting it to grow. So what can we use distance learning with? A year ago, we did our first youth ministry course, and because it was online, we just put out a thing on Facebook and asked any church members who wanted to join us. And every day we had like 10 to 20 visitors in class learning this course. So what could we do if we really expanded that and focused that? How could our whole program change? So we're thinking about that. The second thing is something that we're not thinking about doing in the future, but growing, something we're already doing. A few years ago, a local secular university was trying out an experimental Christian degree program that a lady was trying to push. And so they needed students. And they came to the Ukrainian Bible Institute and said, we will take your 2-year diploma, call it a bachelor's degree, and let your students study correspondence and receive their master's in 2 years. Very fishy, but very exciting. Because now the graduates that have gone on and done this now have a little bit something more in their back pocket to use when they need it. When they go to a school or an orphanage, like you used to be in the past, go and say, hey, can we play with the kids here? And they'll be like, sure. They don't let you do that anymore. They want to know who you are, what's your education. And so now they've already seen the benefit of saying, I've got a degree in education, I have an ethics program I would like to teach your kids, for example. And then, of course, we have all of our students that spent most of their youth in prison, studied for 2 years, and now have a master's degree in something. They think that's pretty cool. But it's really opened up opportunities for ministers in this new world that's getting closed more. It's opening things up. And we want to kind of foster that relationship if it keeps going. They ask nothing of us, except they say, can you guys fit more hours in? Is that possible? Because that will look more like a bachelor's degree if you do. And actually, that's something we've been talking about, not for the sake of this university, but what could we do if we had more time? If we had a full 3rd year. We really love this idea of more practical courses, but you only have so much time, and we're not going to sacrifice the Bible courses for the practical courses. A 3rd year would give us time to really focus on that, maybe like an internship year or something, but also it would let us teach more Bible and unpack some of the packed courses like Jeremiah and Ezekiel in 3 weeks that they currently go through now and look like they've been hit by a train afterwards. What could we do if we had more time? So there's some ideas. Nothing is for sure, but this is what UBI has always been and what we strive to be today, seeking to train spiritual leaders who can confidently serve the church in Ukraine in relevant and practical ways. It's always what we've been about, but now we're asking, what are those relevant and practical ways today? If you don't already get our email update, there are those addresses. You can go there and sign up for them, or just walk up to me and hand me your email address, and I'll put you on there. The first one is our personal one, more about family's perspective of this work, and the second one is the official newsletter of the school. Thank you for your participation in this work. You are helping make this happen, and we celebrate that with you, and I prayed this morning that all of this would just give glory to God, and I hope that it has. Sometimes people refer to the work we do as a sacrifice, but we see it more like a calling. How can we not do what we've been called to do? And we all have a calling. It doesn't mean that we are all supposed to go to Ukraine or any other foreign country necessarily, but he calls us to be faithful to the life he's given us to lead, to the opportunities that we have. So for those of you who are just visiting this morning maybe or watching online, one of the foundational good works that God has prepared in advance for us to do, John 6:29, that is to believe. That's your starting point. It is all of our callings to come back to a relationship with God. But for those of you here who are Christians, I just want to challenge you to be looking to the calling, the opportunity, those good works that God has prepared for you day to day. During this next song we're about to sing, the church sets this aside as a time to invite those who would like to share a need or to respond to this message in any way, as personal need, spiritual need, a need to believe and be baptized into the Lord who is doing such amazing work all over the world. There's this happening everywhere all the time. Praise God for that. So whatever you do, be faithful to the calling that God's given you, and we're going to have some amazing fruit from that. Let's stand and sing.